It's just me.
Good afternoon, everybody. Would like to welcome you to the Capital Budget Subcommittee. We're meeting today for the purpose of budget hearings. Apologize for the delay. We were in full budget hearings earlier. Just for the purpose of everybody that's here, just wanted to let you know the order. That way you can be prepared. We're going to be going, I'll just read them in the order that we're going to be presenting. Board of Public Works, Department of Natural Resources, Housing and Community Development, local jails and detention centers, public school construction, University of Maryland, Maryland Higher Education Commission, and Maryland Environmental Service. So that's the order we're going in, very similar to what was outside. And with that, we will start with Patrick Frank for the Board of Public Works. Mr. Frank, welcome, and please start whenever you're ready, sir. Well, let's just get your mic on. There you go. You're good.
Okay, yes, the Board of Public Works, that is state facilities, is what essentially this program is. As you can see on the first page, one of the projects is this is a deficiency appropriation for ECI, the Eastern Correctional Institution. They're getting some fuel energy systems built there. There's also state house improvements. There's a project on Guilford Avenue in Baltimore City that the Department of General Services will be moving into when they leave State Center. And then bring your attention also to the education building, the Annapolis Data Center, and the Treasury building. What's interesting about those is most of the funding is beyond the CIP, so past 2028. So there's some large out year costs there. I'm going to go on now to the recommendations, which is on page 3. Two recommendations here. First, for the PAYGO project, our recommendation is to concur. And there is a second recommendation that is to amend the state finance and procurement article. This has to do with the construction contingency fund. What I found out this year is when I checked the fund balance, I noticed that it was off by about $300,000 in at the end of fiscal 2021. And so I looked into that and found out that the report is due on December 31st. So the process is they finish the report based on November data. And if there's ever any December data, then the report will be different than the actual end of year number. And so our recommendation here is to go ahead and give them 1 extra month so they can use the December data in their final report for the year. This 1 extra month should not affect the quality of any analysis or anything, but it would give a better number at the end of the year. I'll point out that there is one project that's being deauthorized. It's the Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass statues are completed, and so the money goes back. This happens all the time. Let's see, the big project that is getting funding this year for the construction program is the State House renovation project. That's getting $20,339,000 in GO bonds. Two issues with this is first is that the cost increase since last year, and there's some reasons for that. One is that there's a higher square foot cost, basically that's inflation. Another is the construction manager pre-construction cost, once again inflation again too. And when you increase the cost, then the contingencies that are based on what the costs are increased too. So there is some inflation in this project, and it is a little bit larger than we had anticipated. There are, for the out year, there are a couple of issues we'd like to point out in this program. The first is that the Department of General Services will be moving into the Guilford Avenue building when they leave State Center. This project has been delayed for 2 years now, so they could spend 2 years as the only agency in State Center. So there may be some operational issues there. And so we're wondering what is the plan going to be for the department after after all the other agencies vacate State Center and they wait for this building to come up. A second has to do with the Goldstein building and the Annapolis Data Center. They're here in Annapolis. They're actually scheduled right now, so they would be planned and built about the same time. I think it's very difficult to do just one project in Annapolis because there isn't a lot of space for the agencies to move into while their building is renovated. So I wonder how they would do this. And these are basically operational issues to consider in the out years. Okay, there also, as part of this budget, there are some statewide and regional programs. That is, the Facility Renewal Fund is in this budget. the construction contingency fund, as I mentioned earlier, and a fuel tank storage replacement program that gets $1 million a year, and it usually is around the state trooper barracks. And I think in Carroll County and Garrett County are up now. The issue there is we don't want them to leak for many reasons. So also I'll move on to the construction contingency fund now. Basically, there's a couple of things here. One is that with the higher inflation, it's necessary to have a higher fund balance. So the governor's recommending a $20 million fund balance at the beginning of fiscal 2024. We concur with that. A second issue is the law says that the fund balance can only be 1.25% of the recommended authorization by the spending of, I'm sorry, the Capital Debt Affordability Committee. That's about $7.5 million. So as last year, the bill is going to waive that requirement for this year so that it can have a larger fund balance. So we concur with that. Also, facility renewal program. We'll start here. If you look at Exhibit 1, you can see that the blue there is funding for this program. What's interesting about it is there's a very large appropriation in 2023. That's $70 million of that is the dedicated purpose account, which can be spent over a 5-year period. To date, none of that money has been spent for this year, and they don't anticipate spending any of it. As a result, if you look at what's in the 2024 budget now, they're not putting any additional funds because there are surplus funds for the next year. Also with the facility renewal project, you can see here in exhibit number 2 that the backlog is about $25 million less than it was a year ago. So the backlog is getting smaller, but if you look at it, it's over $200 million of backlog still. So there's still quite a large backlog to fund. There is also, interestingly, just this, I think it was last month, that the department approved a new contract. And it's a new project delivery method. They call it job order contracting procurement. Basically, it's another third party to help manage the maintenance projects. And the realization is that the current capacity is not enough. So getting another company to help out with that is part of their budget now. And with that, the issue there is just the construction contingency fund that I already talked about. So I will, with that, I'll take questions and my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Great job. I don't see any questions. With that, we'll turn to the agency. Challenger, welcome, Secretary.
Good afternoon, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and members of the committee. For the record, I am Atif Chaudhry, Acting Secretary of the Department of General Services. With me here today is Deputy Secretary Nelson Reichert and Acting Assistant Secretary Courtney League for the Design, Construction, and Engineering Unit. On behalf of all the hardworking, dedicated employees at the Department of General Services, we want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the department's capital budget. I also want to take the time to thank Mr. Patrick Frank for his analysis of the department's capital budget. DGS has a key role of supporting the capital infrastructure needs of the various agencies that we support, and we are currently managing over 450 active design and construction projects that support various state agencies with a combined total value of over $1 billion. With regard to the pay-go recommendations, recommended actions, we concur. We also concur with the GAO bond recommended actions regarding the amended construction contingency fund annual reporting requirements, as well as the approval of the deauthorization of $266,000. The department was asked to be prepared to brief the committee on 3 topics. In the interest of time, I know we're running a little late, and being respectful of the committee's time, we will do so at the discretion of the chair. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think we have your written correspondence. I'm going to first, is there any questions first on the agency response? Nope. Okay. Senator McCray, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. In reference to 2100 Guilford Avenue, I see that it's delayed. Could you say what quarter of that year that it's going to be open?
What quarter of, well, we're currently evaluating it now. So we're taking a look at it. There's been some community concerns as well. So we're evaluating that as well. But it would be if it is funded in fiscal year 26. Courtney, do you know?
We would be looking at the end of calendar year 25, probably.
So the fourth quarter, 2025.
For calendar year 25, yes.
Have you all alerted the community that there were some funding delays?
Not yet, and we're working through that now. I'm getting up to speed on this right now, and the next steps are going to be to start to coordinate with the community to understand their additional concerns and follow up with them to give them additional updates.
I'm gonna be very respectful of my colleagues, but if you could follow up with me after this, just to make sure that it's also coordinated with my office, that would be great.
Absolutely, happy to do so.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, I'm working very closely with the vice chair on this, so it's of interest to this whole subcommittee that you work with the vice chair on this.
Absolutely happy to do so, Mr. Chair.
Senator Quarterman.
Thank you. Just to piggyback a little bit off of that last statement there, the vice chair said, when we talk about funding delays and more specifically about with LBIs, LBIs get passed. And generally a lot of these are for a lot of our nonprofit communities and members that really depend and really need that money. What can we do to help, expedite that process per se? Because a lot of times we'll see that someone's awarded LBI, but it might be even the next session by the time they actually get the actual money. So if you could comment on that, please.
No, thank you. Appreciate the question. We are working to add additional staff to our capital grants unit to help expedite that. And I am personally looking at the overall review process to see if we can help expedite that in any way and streamline some processes and workflows there.
Sarah Alfrith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to emphasize that point. I've had a couple of LBIs who were going to go into significant debt and perhaps nonprofits that were perhaps going to have to shut their doors because of the delay from DGS. And Ellen in your shop is incredibly helpful on those one-on-ones, but appreciate your strategic approach to this moving forward. There's more DGS owned buildings in my district than any other district, so I look forward to being very good friends with you. One of those buildings is not owned by you, but the Treasury. And the comptroller was in my office the other day and brought me a picture of one of the bats that is nesting in the top floor. We had a bat here in our building, so I empathize with her. But at the same time, I know that the Treasury building went from being in the CIP in 2025 to 2028. Can you speak to that delay, the rationale behind that delay, and considering kind of the longstanding deferred maintenance and capital needs of the Treasury building, how we can move that up?
Sure, absolutely. And so when it comes to deferred maintenance, we're currently working to address a lot of the maintenance concerns in that building, as well as the Annapolis Data Center and the Revenue Administration building as well. The pest infestation that you mentioned, we are working through that right now. We're currently, you'll see some boom lifts outside the building. We're sealing the building, and those particular species of bats are protected as protected species. So working with an animal control agency in order to get those out as quickly as we possibly can. We are working on some various issues to address in the building as well when it comes to deferred maintenance. And we're looking at when it comes to the capital budget, how we can help work to renovate both that as well as the Annapolis Data Center, which are both in the CIP here. So working very diligently on that. There was at least planned from the beginning to have some overlap of the buildings and create some efficiencies. So we're working to do that and try and expedite that as much as we possibly can.
Okay, I think it's the perfect storm where a capital issue is affecting operations because they have to send employees from the fourth floor home whenever the bats turn up. So we appreciate your focus on that.
Sure, absolutely. And we are well aware that any deferred maintenance that goes undone eventually turns into a capital project, which many times can be more costly and requires a lot more, may require an emergency procurement. So we're working diligently now to do the backlog of our deferred maintenance across all of our aging infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. How many staff are you adding to the capital grants program?
By any chance, Nelson, how many we've got going?
I think there's 3 pins.
3 pins.
3 pins.
I believe we will confirm that with you, but
No
I
problem.
believe it's 3.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you and your team. And your capital grant staff are doing an amazing job. It's just they have to do a lot more with less. So we just want to thank your staff.
Absolutely. And they've gotten a significant increase in the number of grants. So we're working through diligently to expedite them as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Colleagues, moving on to the Department of Natural Resources. We'll start off with Andrew Gray. Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, start whenever you get settled, sir.
Thank you, sir. On page one, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, the fiscal 2024 PAYGO and capital budget analysis. You see the grant and loan summary there. 11 programs budgeted for fiscal 2024. On page 3 is the PAYGO and GEO bond recommended actions to concur with the allowance and the authorizations and amendments to prior authorizations and proposed pre-authorizations. So basically concurring with everything. In terms of page 4, the updates, Resiliency through Restoration Initiative program is going to receive funding again, coming up in a couple of years. So it's projected to no longer receive funding. It's now in the CIP again. Local Parks and Playground Infrastructure Program funding ends. That was $85 million per year for 2 years. It's not in the fiscal 2024 budget. The Natural Resources Police helicopter costs increased by $100,000, and there's a deficiency appropriation for that purpose. Exhibit 1 reflects the big picture. It's around a $50 million decrease. This largely reflects the $85 million for the Local Parks and Infrastructure Program, and also the $25 million for the Critical Maintenance Program funding and the dedicated purpose account not being reflected in fiscal 2024. There is funding, though, for 2 new funds created by Chapter 39 of 2022, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act. So that does bring in some funding. It helps to kind of bulwark a little bit of that decrease. In terms of the transfer tax increases, does increase due to overattainment. Exhibit 2 reflects the differences between 23 and 24. You see that there's around $53.8 million increase, largely due to that overattainment. So that's the money coming in from fiscal 22, more than we expected, more than we budgeted. That's then applied 2 years later, and that's available for fiscal 2024. This is obviously pushing up all the programs that receive special funds in the budget. Exhibit 3 reflects information about the programs traditionally funded with transfer tax revenue. And you do see that bump up in transfer tax special funds as a result of primarily of the overattainment. Exhibit 4 reflects the Maryland Park Service pay-as-you-go capital funding. And what you're seeing here largely is the general fund increase for the 2 new funds, the Park System Critical Maintenance Fund, $70 million in general funds, and the Park System Capital Improvements and Acquisition Fund, $36.9 million. Although there was a little bit of funding $43.1 million worth of funding in fiscal 23 that was balanced with the program open space state share that was transferred to the program as authorized by Chapter 39. In terms of the programs, program open space land acquisition local programs, $175.2 million. Just brought this up briefly because 2 things. There's $10 million now of part of the program open space state share funding that now goes to Baltimore City. So Chapter 39 of 2022, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, bumped up from $6 million to $10 million, the amount that goes to Baltimore City. It's reflected here. And also just to note briefly that the program open space public access program is now being budgeted separately, which is reflected here. So this is a new carve out in the sense it's always been there, but now it's being budgeted separately for transparency purposes by the Department of Budget and Management, and reflects the funding for public access to various public sites in Maryland. Natural Resources Development Fund funding is around $32.5 million. 2 things to note here. The dam assessments and rehabilitation funding has always been a component of the Natural Resources Development Fund, but it looks to be using a lot more of the resources going into the future. So there could be less funding available for strictly new park development as a result of the need for the dams and the dam assessments and rehabilitation, obviously very important for kind of public safety purposes. But then on top of that, you also have the money that's going to the State Park Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund. That's Maryland Environmental Service work for wastewater and water treatment in our park systems. So that also comes out of this funding. So therefore, we potentially could see less money available. There's a pre-authorization of $6 million in general obligation bond funds in fiscal 25 to complete or for construction for 2 projects, Elk Neck State Park and Elk Neck State Park, and also for Rosaryville State Park as well. Critical maintenance projects, program open space funding here is around $5.5 million. What's happening is that in combination with the separate fund, the Park System Critical Maintenance Fund, $70 million, the $5.5 million here, the administration hopes to wipe out the critical maintenance backlog, which was such a key component of the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, kind of the impetus for that in the first place, the State Park Investment Commission. So it's a great sign. We have some concerns that we'll raise in a second about the ability, staffing wise and timing wise, and just asset wise to be able to do that work. In terms of the kind of one comment we'd have here, there is a modification of funding for fiscal 23 authorization for the critical maintenance program There was $17 million is reflected as part of that for the Druid Hill Park, which is really a local project. So that's been carved out as a separate authorization in order to be able to provide for that project instead of having it going through the state funding. And then similarly, there's a project for the Simpkins Mill property that's also being carved out. Instead of being used as state funding, it's going to be just a grant to the organizations that can actually do that work. DLS recommends approval of those two modifications. In terms of the waterway improvement program, is on page 18. Just really brief note here, it's $16 million, so no major change in the funding reflected here, which is a little confusing because on the top of page 19, you see that they actually had some substantial increases in revenues coming in from vessel excise tax revenues that came in fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. So it was around $37.3 million in 21, $36.8 million, well over the amounts we have seen in recent years. However, that money does not appear to be reflected in either the operating or PAYGO budgets. Therefore, DLS recommends that DNR comment on how it is using that additional revenue that came in, the future estimates for the vessel excise tax revenue. The oyster restoration program is around $2 million or so in fiscal 2024. Slight modification in terms of the timing of the work they're doing there. Just one note here that they're really now focusing a lot on the Eastern Bay Restoration Project going forward. They're almost completed with the 5 restoration projects, which is fantastic. And now they're kind of focusing on this additional project as mandated by Chapter 574 of 2022. Then the Park System Critical Maintenance Fund, the $70 million that will help us get to the critical maintenance $75 million backlog. And the Park System Capital Improvement and Acquisition Fund, $36.9 million. One of the concerns here, of course, is that the money is not completely allocated in terms of how it's going to be used. First issue here reflects the fact that there's a large funding increase for the park system primarily by Chapter 39, but we have concerns about the staffing flux in the engineering and construction unit. New positions were added, but obviously it takes time to hire, then to train and actually deploy effectively those positions. There's an expenditure deadline. Chapter 39 requires that the $70 million be spent by July 1, 2026, which is an aggressive schedule regardless of the amount of money. And then $70 million is a tremendous amount coming through the pipeline for them to be able to do that, especially since they've only been able to kind of encumber around $5.8 million in recent years. And then there's no asset management system. So this is a larger concern of being able to know, what do you have? What's the condition of those assets? How are they depreciating over time? What's a schedule for actually being able to kind of fix them? DNR is working on that. Their testimony does have some information about some progress and pilot project they're kind of doing in Western Maryland. But obviously, if they don't have a system now, how do we can be assured that that $75 million is going to be used effectively and make sure that going forward, we're going to be able to kind of get the asset management that we were really looking for and to safeguard our investments. DLS recommends that DNR comment on how it will address the staffing flux, the July 2026 expenditure deadline, and lack of an asset management system as it works to its PAYGO capital funding and critical maintenance needs. And then Appendix 1 on page 26 refers to the program open space local distribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Thank you for that analysis. I don't see any questions. With that, we'll call up the agency. Secretary Kurtz, good to see you. If you or any member of the team want to come up, please have them come up now and start whenever you're ready, sir.
Excellent. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the acting secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. With me today is Alan Fisher, the deputy secretary. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss our capital budget today, and also a thank you to Mr. Gray for such a thorough analysis. When you look at our capital budget, it really is the roadmap to the work that we're getting done across the state. The funds you will notice are oftentimes spent in partnership with local governments, nonprofits, community groups, because what we do is inherently local. We're thinking about the big picture and we're spending that across the state. There are several programs and things that were touched on by the analyst. I did want to touch briefly on the Restoration Through Resilience program. This provides us a really interesting opportunity as a state to focus on these projects that local communities want and that provide multiple benefits. So we get water quality, we get resilience. I wanted to highlight a program or a project that was just recently completed in the West River. It's a living shoreline project that does mitigation of stormwater and also resilience from water, kind of through surge and things like that, while also providing green space for these people. It's a very important program. We're excited to see that back in the budget. When you look across our other programs, again, we're working in partnership with local government and non-governmental institutions to make sure that that money is spent wisely as possible, and also to make sure we're getting as much leverage as possible, whether those be federal funds, local funds, funding with the passage of the Conservation Finance Act from private investment as well. So excited to work on that, and a commitment that we want to make today is that you're going to see us really strive to make sure that every one of these dollars is getting multiple benefit as we move forward, whether that is leveraging some cutting edge science that's coming out of the department, our institutions, but making sure that we're spending this money not only wisely, but cost effectively. So with that, I'd like to turn to some of the questions that were raised by the analyst. Given the time, I will not cover the things that we say we agree. I'm going to jump into the two explanations. So I wanted to start with the Waterways Improvement Fund, the vehicle excise or the vessel excise tax. This is a really important program because it helps us manage the 400 public boating facilities, the 220 channels, the 62 shallow channels in the state of Maryland. One of the reasons you see that difference is because we've been building up that fund because many of these projects are very expensive. The funding also does go to several pieces across the department, so we can provide that as well, but goes into other agencies that work on managing or other units, within the agency that work on managing these facilities. Turning now to the question about funding increases and our engineering and construction and our asset management tracking system. So when you look across our vacancies at the department, it's no secret that our engineering and construction unit is the one that we struggle to keep staffed up. Engineers are hot demand. I think we all see that across the state in the federal level, local level, and in private sector. So this is one where we do have pretty stiff competition to keep these people employed. Also very important for the work that we're doing with so much money, which we're very excited about because of all of the critical backlogs and the maintenance we have in our state parks in every district across the state. So very, very excited about this. Also, to be completely blunt, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to spend quickly. And while we're working on developing new processes internally, including packaging some of these projects through indefinite quantity contracts, we are concerned, but we are looking at this very heavily, and we may be coming back next year and suggesting or proposing statutory language change to make sure that we can deliver on all of these projects and this investment. In terms of the asset management, we're working at a pilot right now, as was mentioned by the analyst in Western Maryland, to make sure that our e-maintain software is something that we can do. So we've allocated a staff there. That person is using the software, and then we'll be able to be kind of the trainer internally for us to be able to move that software through the department across the rest of the units in the regions. And with that, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for having a deep dive conversation yesterday about a number of these challenges. You have a lot on your plate in terms of money and the critical maintenance backlog to address in our state park system. Before we started this hearing, we had DBM personnel in here and talking about ways that we can help cut down on the length of time it takes to fill a vacancy, particularly in kind of the vacancies that are most persistent across state government, appreciating that engineers are hard to fill, and would suggest to you that, and we suggested to the secretary earlier, that we can come up with some more fun job titles. I mean, engineer in DNR is one thing, but engineer in our state park system is a different thing altogether. That might be helpful in helping you fill those vacancies. My question to you is, are there other tools, be it in our procurement process or through personnel, that would be helpful to you in not just in the state parks backlog, but in other places to help you achieve some of your capital goals?
Yeah, I think looking across the different units, we've got a couple of different places I think where we could look to help us kind of break down the silos and do what I was talking about in terms of identifying these areas where we're either, right now we're putting money to a water quality issue, but we know that solution, maybe planting trees, is going to give us a cooling effect, things like that. So I think there are opportunities for us to think about staff we have now or other staff that can help break down some of those silos and spend some of that money a little bit more effectively as well. But I can send along more details about where we see those opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it. Colleagues, we have some public witnesses. I'll call them up, and just a reminder for the public, it's 2 minutes. We're going to call up Tim Casey, Reed Perry, Charlotte Davison, and Jones, please. come on up, and I'm just gonna have Tim Casey, why don't you kick it off and then go in there any order you wish. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Tim Casey. I'm a volunteer with the Friends of Maryland State Parks. Two quick comments. One is we advocate full funding for the governor's 2024 budget for DNR and the Maryland Park Service. Secondly, and I won't belabor this is the staffing issue that's been discussed pretty much over and over again with engineering construction. But I'd like to add one scope addition to this, and that is there are best practice collaborative project management that has been done in the past and can be done with specifically Department of the General Services, DGS. So we're just encouraging that the teamwork with DGS, as well as the hiring of the engineers and engineering construction, be paid attention to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and members of the subcommittee. I'm here, my name is Reed Perry, and I'm here on behalf of the Partners for Open Space to testify in favor of the capital budget proposal for Department of Natural Resources for fiscal year 2024, particularly the full funding included for program open space. When it comes to protecting land for outdoor rec and for nature, preserving farmland for future generations, and supporting heritage tourism, Maryland's program open space is our state's best and most important tool. Program open space supports projects in all counties and in the city of Baltimore. So many of the local and state parks and other open spaces that exist today exist because of program open space. Maryland will continue to grow and develop, which is why ongoing full funding is so needed for this important program. So again, we thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we support full funding as it's reflected in the FY24 capital budget.
Good afternoon. My name's Ann Jones, and I knew I'd be here representing Forever Maryland and also the Baltimore County Land Trust Alliance, but Charlotte Davis is right now in another hearing, and she wanted to be here for the Rural Maryland Council, so I kind of put on 3 hats while I'm sitting here quickly, but I won't take very long. We support the proposed budget, are delighted to see some of the paybacks that had been promised for years being actually paid back. And it is very important. I work a lot with the Rural Legacy Program, and I just wanted to give a on-the-ground example of a few projects that were done in Baltimore County this year. We've protected farms that are immediately adjacent to the Pretty Boy Reservoir, which is a source of water supply for most of the Baltimore metropolitan area. We protected farms that protect stream valleys that run throughout the area and increasing the water quality. That also drain, most of the area drains into either Pretty Boy or Loch Raven. So there's a very definite water quality aspect, drinking water. And finally, we've been able to protect farms that are right along the NCR trail that protects both the view shed and protects the people that are walking on those trails. So those are just 3 quick examples of some on the ground things that are done with the funds. And thank you for your continued support.
Thank you very much. Any questions for this panel? Thank you very much. Colleagues, will now turn our attention to the Department of Housing and Community Development. Start off with Ms. Haskell, Emily Haskell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm going to start on page 5. DHCD's fiscal 2024 proposed capital budget totals $207.5 million across 13 programs. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows the fiscal 2024 request by category and fund source. You'll see that just over a third of the funding is for DHCD's various community development programs, while just under a third is for the development of rental housing and shelter. I'll move on to exhibit 2 on page 6. This puts the fiscal 2024 funding level in context with the previous year's funding. So you'll see there's a large decrease compared to the funding provided in fiscal 2023. However, this is really because the funding provided in fiscal 2023 was at an unprecedented high level. It includes federal funds for broadband, as well as federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act for COVID-19 mortgage relief through the Homeowner Assistance Fund. And in addition to the high level of federal funds that were provided in fiscal 2023, as well as fiscal 2022, there's also significant increases in fiscal 2023 from available state funding that was provided really across almost all of DHCD's programs, and that was intended to be one-time funding in fiscal 2023. So in fiscal 2024, the proposed level is actually above the planned amount by about 25%. And that is due to funding for the Strategic Demolition Fund and the Homeownership Works Program. Both of those programs, fiscal 2023 was supposed to be the final year of funding, although they're both continued in fiscal 2024 and the out years of the CIP. That includes for the Strategic Demolition Fund. That program is receiving $25 million in fiscal 2024. That includes $20 million for the Project Core initiative in Baltimore City. And then the program is programmed at $20 million annually in the out years. The Homeownership Works program was piloted in fiscal years 2022 and 2023 using federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And the fiscal 2024 proposed funding level includes $10 million in PAYGO general funds for that program, and then $5 million is programmed annually in the out years of the CIP. Next, I want to talk about the fact that federal funds are not recognized in the CIP in terms of significant amounts that are anticipated from federal legislation, such as the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There are significant funds that are anticipated and expected to be spent over several years for the State Small Business Credit Initiative, the Homeowner Assistance Fund, and then also there's funding anticipated to be spent annually for the Home Investment Partnerships Program from the American Rescue Plan, about $3 million annually put towards the rental housing development. None of that funding is included in either fiscal 2024 or in the out years of the CIP. So DLS is recommending adopting narrative, requesting that estimates of anticipated federal funds be included in the CIP. I should have mentioned also broadband funding, which I'll talk about later. $100 million is expected from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which could be received as soon as this June, and that funding is not included in the CIP either. Next, I'll talk about rental housing programs. You'll see in Exhibit 3 on page 8 that funding for rental housing programs, there's $57 million proposed in the fiscal 2024 budget. That's a significant decrease again compared to fiscal 2023 due to significant one-time funds provided in 2023, both from available surplus as well as Chapter 337 of 2022 authorized the transfer of $30 million in income tax revenues to the rental housing fund. And that's reflected as special funds in this chart in fiscal 2023, the dark blue bar. So the amount planned in fiscal 2020, or proposed in fiscal 2024 exceeds the planned level by about $6.5 million, but it is about $10.5 million below the fiscal 2022 level. Not shown in this chart, DHCD is also putting federal funds from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program toward the development of affordable rental housing. That's $25.5 million in fiscal 2023. That's not shown in here. The funding has been appropriated in the operating budget. So with the additional funds provided in fiscal 2023, DHCD used about $99 million through the regular rental housing programs. And then also this Exhibit 4 on page 9 shows they use some of the funding for new programs under the rental housing programs, totaling about $68 million. The top 3 bars represent funds that were awarded in January. All 3 of these programs help cover increased costs for projects that have received low-income housing tax credit financing, but have experienced increased costs over the past few years. And the programs are just differentiated by different eligibility of the type of financing received. The bottom bar, the Emerging Developer Fund, this program will be $3 million, providing short-term loans to new affordable housing developers. And the applications for this program are currently under review. Next, I'm going to jump ahead to the first issue in the analysis, which relates to broadband funding. As you're all aware, funding was greatly expanded for broadband initiatives through federal legislation. Exhibit 7 on page 14 shows the funding appropriated to date across both the operating and capital budgets. As you'll see, there's no funding included in fiscal 2024 for broadband initiatives. This chart shows it includes all nearly $400 million allocated in federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And it also includes $35 million approximately from other sources in prior years, such as GEO bonds and federal funds from the CARES Act. And as I mentioned, this does not include the $100 million that is anticipated from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Finally, in this chart, I will note the fiscal 2023 funding of $172 million is currently in the dedicated purpose account. I'm going to talk just about the capital budget programs. The operating budget broadband programs are discussed in the operating budget analysis. Exhibit 8 on page 15 shows the broadband programs funded in DHCD's capital budget. The largest, the top bar, Connect Maryland. This is the largest program for infrastructure expansion. You'll see it appears in the chart that a significant amount of funding is still remaining. However, the final $95 million in awards is expected to be announced at any time. The application period for that funding closed in December. On the Connecting Public Housing and Rural Digital Connectivity Block Grant programs, these programs are still in development, and DLS has asked DHCD to comment on the status and timeline for those programs. Next, I'll talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Exhibit 9 on page 17 shows the overall national funding in the legislation for broadband. The largest program is the first one on the table, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD. This program will provide a minimum of $100 million to each state. The allocations for each state will be based on maps currently under development by the FCC, and the allocations are expected to be announced by this June. DHCD has received an initial planning grant, $5 million for the BEAD program to develop a 5-year plan. The funding was received in December, but has not yet been added to DHCD's budget. Next, I'll turn to the second issue in the analysis, which relates to the State Small Business Credit Initiative. Nearly $200 million was provided to the state of Maryland from the American Rescue Plan Act for the SSBCI program, which funds state programs that expand access to capital for small and underserved businesses. The $200 million will come to Maryland across 3 tranches, and expenditures under the program are expected from fiscal 2023 to approximately fiscal 2028. DHCD is the lead agency for the program in Maryland. Exhibit 10 shows how DHCD has allocated funds across both DHCD programs, as well as providing some funding to Commerce and TEDCO. So DHCD is retaining a little over $100 million, and that funding will be deployed through the Neighborhood Business Works program. Exhibit 11 on page 19 shows DHCD's timeline for expending these funds across 2 subprograms. The Loan Participation Program provides loans of $250,000 to $5 million, and that can be used for working capital as well as real estate acquisition or renovation. DHCD is also planning to allocate a portion of that funding to community development financial institutions, which will be able to make loans of less than $250,000. The Venture Funds program is designed for businesses with high job growth potential that have raised early stage equity, and then this program would provide equity investments of $500,000 to $2.5 million. Priority for both of DHCD's programs is given to businesses with fewer than 10 employees or to businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And I'm going to go all the way back to page 3, which shows the PAYGO recommended narrative related to federal funds. And on the next page, DLS recommends concurring and approving the general obligation bond authorization for DHCD. And that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haskell. I know that's all you have, but that was a lot, so thank you. We appreciate it. I don't see any questions. We'll now turn it over to the agency. Come on over, Secretary Day. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Jake Day. I'm the Acting Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development. To my left is Owen McAvoy, the Deputy Secretary of the Department, and to my right is Rick Gordon, the Director of the Office of Statewide Broadband. It's my honor to be here today with you, not only to represent Governor Moore, but also as a steward of what I think of as the most effective use of the state of Maryland's dollars. And I think the department has proven over the years that, as you'll see in the materials provided to you, we have significant economic impact in return for the state's investment. The 20 maps provided to you give you a picture of where the FY22 dollars went through mortgage programs, tax credit deals, broadband monies, energy efficiency programs, you name it. And that amounts to $4.9 billion in economic impact, $1.1 billion in wages, equating to 22,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and $83 million generated in local and state tax revenue returns. From a capital budget standpoint, I think it is reasonable to say that last year was a banner year, both thanks to federal funds as well as the one-time significant increase in rental housing funded provided by the General Assembly. And it's my hope that FY24 budget adopted will continue to reflect our aspirations, not only for providing shelter for all Marylanders, but also for building livable places, for ensuring that our homeless population is sheltered, and of course, to ensure that we are addressing unjust policy decisions of the past. So I want to point out that DHCD is not only a vocal advocate for the resources that we so efficiently deploy, but we're also historically creative. And with the budget we receive, we will stretch dollars to ensure that the priorities in Maryland communities are implemented. So want to take a quick second to thank Ms. Haskell for the diligent review of our budget proposal and to address the recommendations and our responses. So first and foremost, I want to point out there was the commentary in the analysis about the Laurel backstretch housing. We have $10 million in FY23, and the recommendation is for $10 million to be put into FY24. The total $20 million is what's needed to address the backstretch housing need for that project, and we'll work with the selected developer to ensure that that is sufficient to complete the project. With respect to the PAYGO recommendation, the recommended adopted narrative, and the bond, GEO bond recommendation, the department respectfully agrees with both recommendations. And then there was, of course, the comment about the anticipated timeline for the Connecting Public Housing and Rural and Digital Connectivity Block Grant programs, the broadband monies. The U.S. Treasury Department received from DHCD in September of last year our proposed spending plan. So we're waiting for that response. When we receive it, we will ensure that we all have visibility of it and we will put it into action. So we're expecting that to be sometime in spring 2023. The last thing I just want to acknowledge is the SSBCI funding plan. The department is actively working to deploy those resources, and we have the operational capacity to do so. And then with respect to the broadband deployment, in March, you'll see the $95 million in anticipated awards going out the door. So we are getting close to, we are within 4 weeks of those announcements being made. Happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just wanted to get a comment. On page 8, it references the funding for rental housing program. I've had some of the advocates come in and talk about last year's budget versus this year's budget. I know that a number of the dollars that came from the federal opportunities that we have received, but I wanted to also give you the opportunity just to comment for for the advocates.
Sure. Mr. Vice Chairman, that is, when I say the department is effective at deploying resources, there's no better indicator of that than what we do with our rental housing works program and the partnership monies associated with that. We're good at deploying those resources because those advocates, the affordable housing developers, are lined up, ready to go to closing. They're there and ready to put shovels in grounds and roofs over Maryland families' heads. And so we want the maximum amount of resources available. Frankly, I don't think there's a limit to what the General Assembly could authorize us to spend and what we could spend. Obviously, there are limits to those resources. But what I would say to you and what I'd say to those advocates is that we have continued to work with the governor on expressing that the pipeline is active and ready. The money is, the developers are there. The projects are ready to go to closing. And so if entrusted with additional resources like we were in FY23, we will put it out on the street. And so this department remains an advocate for those dollars and a believer that the housing challenges that we have today need a supply response. And so we've got to build housing.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Colleagues, we have just a few public witnesses. Just a reminder, 2 minutes each, and I'm just going to call you all up at once. Miranda Williams, Claudia Wilson-Randall, Chris Gillis, and Ellen James. Welcome.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Great. Good afternoon, Chairman Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Miranda Darden-Willems, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. Our coalition includes 185 member organizations that use DHCD financing to build, own, and manage affordable rental housing communities across Maryland. Last week, we held our Housing Day, so many of you recently heard about the pending rental projects in your districts and the challenges developers face trying to build new affordable housing communities in today's economic environment. I'm here today to support the governor's proposed budget for DHCD's rental housing programs, but also to tell you this budget is the lowest of the last 4 years. It is $100 million less than last year, and it comes at a time when the need for more affordable housing has become even more urgent. There are 90 affordable housing projects under review at DHCD right now, which would take $250 million to finance, and they expect to run out of funds in the next month or two. I know it's a big ask, but I'm here anyway to ask for more money. We could use another $170 million to finance all of these projects in the pipeline. They're struggling to get to closing, and the longer they wait, the bigger the gaps are. With rising construction costs and interest rates and inflation, these are all increases that affordable housing projects simply cannot absorb. Every day they wait to close these projects, they get more expensive. So the time to invest is now. We know there are many important priorities that all need more funding, but this program is a solid investment of state dollars. It brings at least $11 in other investment for every dollar you invest. These are loans repaid with interest. They create jobs. They increase the tax base. So we ask you to please consider allocating additional funds to rental housing programs, and I will stop there. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Wilson-Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. We are a statewide network of housing and community development partners. Our partners are engaged in housing development, housing counseling, community-based revitalization, and a variety of projects throughout the state. The mission of Community Development Network is to promote, strengthen, and advocate for community development sector throughout Maryland's urban, suburban, and rural communities. CDN envisions a state in which all neighborhoods are thriving and where people of all incomes have abundant opportunities for themselves and for their families. I want to speak here today in favor of the Department of Housing and Community Development budget because they are our partners, our very strong partners, and our organizations could not do the work that they do throughout the state without the Department of Housing and Community Development. And there's just been a lot of outstanding work that has taken place throughout the pandemic with the department and our partners in the lead. Our partners have been on the front line of emergency rental assistance, certainly in the development, preservation of rental housing throughout the state. These are the organizations that are all on the front lines. So today I'm speaking in favor of all of the budget items with a few amendments and a few requests. As my colleague already talked about, we need at least $150 million for rental housing programs. Those investments leverage others' dollars significantly. And in order for people throughout the state to have opportunity to live in affordable housing throughout the state, it's critical that we do this. I also want to ask for an additional $2 million for community legacy so that it's restored to where it was before, and another $3 million for shelter and transition in order to shore up the social safety net in the state of Maryland. And finally, I'm just putting a little asterisk. The Baltimore Bernie needs operating dollars to go with the capital funds. And I put that in my written testimony. But thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Ellen Janes. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Baltimore Partnership. We're one of the most regular users of the department's community revitalization resources. And I wanted to share a bit about our experience so you can hear the impact. I second Claudia's support for an additional $2 million in community legacy. We typically use Bernie as our core resource, but community legacy, like Bernie, supports flexible programs. It supports multiple projects in a given year. It allows us to mobilize partners of all kinds, from homeownership and rental housing providers to small businesses. In our cases, we use the resources to repurpose vacant property. And we typically leverage state funding at least 5 times, $5 for every $1 of state revitalization resources. To give you an idea of the impact of this money, in 2 of the 11 neighborhoods we serve in the heart of Baltimore, we have essentially eliminated vacant property. Both of these neighborhoods, Barclay and Greenmount West, had over 40% vacant less than 10 years ago. There's been no displacement. In fact, there's been several hundred units of permanently affordable housing created, as well as small businesses, public parks, playgrounds, community gardens, pathways, all of them made possible by your flexible funding. I want to thank you for your longstanding support for these resources. They are a national model, and I invite you to come out, and a lot of our work is done in the Vice Chair's district, and we'd love to welcome you so you can experience just how effective these programs are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See any questions? Thank you very much to this panel. Really appreciate it. Committee will actually now turn our attention to the public school construction. I know the former chair of Budget and Taxation is here, and I still feel like you can still kill my bills. So I want to make sure that we're responsive. But with that, I'll turn to Laura Hyde. Ms. Hyde, welcome.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Laura Hyde, and this is school construction capital. And we're starting on page 1 with the capital budget summary. You can see there that in fiscal 2024, the capital budget improvement program for school construction totals $1.1 billion for 6 programs, including projected revenue bonds for Build to Learn. This allowance is $365 million less than the fiscal 2023 allowance, primarily due to the decrease in projected funding for Build to Learn. And moving to page 5, exhibit 1, this chart shows the fiscal 2024 request by fund source. Revenue bonds for Build to Learn are approximately 40% of this amount. PAYGO special funds from the Fiscal Responsibility Fund are allocated approximately 25%. This goes to the public school construction program. And then there's PAYGO general funds and GO bonds allocated to multiple programs, and those are 17% respectively. Turning to page 6. Exhibit 2, this shows new school construction funding by source in fiscal 24 compared to previous years. The 21st Century School Facilities Program included a provision expressing the intent of the General Assembly that public school construction funding, excluding funds for Build to Learn, meet or exceed $400 million annually. And then with chapter 32 of 2022, this increased that amount to $450 million. In fiscal 2024, new funding totals $644 million, which exceeds this intent. Turning to page 7, this is exhibit 3. This shows the governor's proposed CIP as introduced in the fiscal 2024 budget exceeds the legislative intent of $450 million. However, in fiscal 2025 through 2028, the CIP as introduced falls short slightly of this goal. Then in this next section, this discusses specific school construction programs in the CIP. The first one on page 8 is exhibit 4. This shows the 75% and the 100% recommendations for the public school construction program. In fiscal 2024, requests totaled $833 million, with 152 projects receiving funding totaling $485 million as programmed in the CIP. This covers about 58% of requests. Some LEAs had 100% allocation totals that exceeded the requested amount, and so DLS recommends that ISC comment on this issue. Moving to page 10, this is exhibit 5. This shows the proposed budget for the EGRC supplemental grant program, which receives the mandated amount of $40 million in fiscal 2024. I should make a note that ISC provided updated numbers for the fiscal 2024 allowance, which is shown in this graph. It's not the same as in the CIP. Based on the requirements for the program, 10 LEAs qualify, which is up from 7 LEAs in 2023. The governor's CIP shows a fund balance for this program of over $100 million. So DLS recommends that IAC comment on that issue. Turning to page 12, this is the Healthy School Facilities Fund. This shows allocations from fiscal 2021 through 2023 for the Healthy Schools Facility Fund. In fiscal 2024, the program received the allowance of $90 million in GO bonds as mandated in Chapter 32. In fiscal 2022 and 2023, this program received a total of $80 million in federal stimulus funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. And because these funds must be spent by September 2024, DLS recommends that IAC comment on the status of the expenditures for this program. This next section talks about Build to Learn bond issuances. So we're moving to page 17. This is exhibit 9. So chapter 20 authorizes the issuance of up to $2.2 billion in revenue bonds for the Build to Learn program. This chart shows that in calendar 2021 and 2022, bond issuances for the program totaled $699 million, with an average annual debt service of $36 million, which is covered from the Education Trust Fund. If you look on page 18, this is exhibit 10. This graph shows that as interest rates increase, the amount available for Build to Learn program decreases. As of December 2022, the amount projected for the program is approximately $1.7 billion, just with the caution that this amount is subject to change based on the bond market conditions. Then with exhibit 11 on page 19, this shows the Build to Learn allowances and allocations by LEA using the currently projected allowance of $1.7 million. Of this amount, $947 million has been approved by IAC for Build to Learn projects, with $750 million remaining for future project approvals. Then on pages 21 through 23 provides updates on the 21st Century Schools Program, pass-through grants, and the revolving loan fund. For the revolving loan fund, no loans have been processed for that fund to date. So DLS suggested that ISC comment on whether funding for the program is needed in fiscal 2024. Then turning to Exhibit 14. This is unexpended funds. The governor's CIP shows that a total balance of unexpended funds for school construction programs totals $544 million. But because these balances aren't broken out before fiscal 2018, DLS just suggested that IAC provide this information. Then just below this exhibit, this is on contingency funds. DLS notes that IAC is responsible for submitting a quarterly report to the General Assembly on school construction program contingency balances by LEA. However, the last report was received in March 2022, so we suggested that IAC comment on this delay. Turning to Exhibit 15. On page 26, this just shows the current average age of school buildings in the state is 31 years, with the average deviation in building age starting in fiscal 2005, which is the baseline for this measure. It ranges from -20 years in Kent County to +11 years in Talbot County. The remaining information in this analysis covers maintenance effectiveness and the state cost share. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance for this program, and this concludes my presentation. I stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hyde, for that great analysis. Any questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much. I'll now call up the agency. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Good to see you all. I want to thank Laura for her comments, first of all. With me today, I want to introduce you to our team. First of all, we have Alex Donahue, who is our new executive director. He's done a fantastic job, and we're really lucky to have him. Next is Arabia Davis, who is our program manager, and Tom Lockman, who is our new CFO. I won't say a lot other than we've changed a lot. We now manage over $1 billion in projects each year compared to 2 or 3 years ago, it was around 400 million. I would say that one thing I've pressed and the staff is carrying out is that we want to be user friendly more than our reputation was before. We want to, and Alex is, cooperating with counties, advising them how to move projects through our system in a more expedited process, and to try to help them out to get what their final goal is. So we're really reaching out to and trying to meet with all the counties that we can to, and we have personal meetings with executives and council and school boards to listen to what their issues are. So right now, I'll pass it on to Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for this time. Before we respond to the analysis, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the big things that have been going on at the IAC and in school construction. We've been busy putting these additional funds to use through improved support of LEA planning and project management. In the last several years, we've been heavily focused on program implementation and expansion, which is ongoing. In the last year, our primary focus has really been on communication with our LEAs, with our county governments, with other stakeholders like the associations for the boards of ed, the counties, the Association of School Business Officials, the superintendents, and our elected officials. We believe that this enhanced communication going both directions, from us to our stakeholders to inform them of changes, and from them back to us to inform us of what they need, is moving the IAC into an era of greater collaboration and cooperation. Ultimately will make this agency a strong force for positive change to the benefit of all of Maryland's public pre-K-12 students. Today, thank you again for your time, and Laura for her analysis. Arabia will talk a little bit about our programs, and Tom will respond to the analysis recommendations.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. To meet the various school construction needs across the state, funding appropriations have increased for many of the programs administered by the IEC. In 2021, the General Assembly created the Built to Learn program. Shortly thereafter, on a rolling basis, the IEC began accepting applications and approving capital allocations through this program. To date, the IEC has approved allocations for eligible projects totaling more than $900 million. Also, $90 million in healthy school facility funds has been allocated to eligible environmentally friendly projects that primarily support improvements to school HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, remediating lead and water, and repairing roofs. This year, in response to concerns raised by the local education agencies as it relates to the application schedule, the IEC will consider program scheduling adjustments at their March meeting. The proposed revised schedule for the Healthy Schools Facility Fund program cycle aligns with the legislative session and completion of the anticipated IEC approval process in July, allowing projects to move sooner than ever before. The outstanding level of financial support from the state has resulted in a larger number of projects moving forward. The IEC has introduced more flexibility into our processes, increasing the amount of time for LEAs, local education agencies, to complete allocated projects and extending the application deadlines to allow additional project submissions as needed. The IEC continues to work hard with each local education agency to maximize the use of available funds. And I'll turn it over to Tom.
Good afternoon. Since joining the IAC last year, I've been coming up to speed on the history and growth of the IAC's large and complex capital programs. And the state's continued and growing commitment to these programs is impressive, and they provide tremendous positive impact to Maryland students and stakeholders. I want to again thank Ms. Hyde for her analysis and her support in this process. The analysis asks us several questions, which we believe we've answered in our written testimony. The central theme is that the IEC is working to continuously support LEAs in their execution of this immense and growing number of projects. Specifically, we received several questions about the rate of expenditure of funds. The IAC's expenditures and encumbrances often lag behind projects for two primary reasons. First, many LEAs choose to expend local funds first on project activity and then subsequently request reimbursement from the state at a later date. In addition, some LEAs may struggle to move projects forward because of their historical staffing levels not necessarily being sufficient to support the volume of projects that are now possible with the additional state investment that's being made through programs that are administered by the IAC. Following a long period of vacancies in the IAC's finance group, our work over the next few months will focus on intensive auditing, reconciliation, and reporting in order to put the IAC in an even stronger position to continue to support the LEAs while we execute this tremendous amount of work. And with that, I believe we'll all stand for questions.
Well, thank you very much. Any questions? All right, I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Committee will now turn our attention to local jails and detention centers. We'll start with Jacob Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jacob Cash. I'll be going over the local jails and detention centers capital grant program. The cover page shows the overall request for the CIP for this program. In 2023, that amount was 2.6 million, and in 2024, the request is 13.2 million. So there's a substantial increase. Some of this is because projects previously authorized are now receiving some construction money.
Cash. I don't think you're screen sharing right now.
My apologies. Oh. Yes. There we go.
We're going to have you start all. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Right. So from the beginning, no. Exhibit 3 shows the 3 projects that are being funded in 2024. There is a medical addition in Frederick County, which is going into the final stages of construction. A new project in Montgomery County for replacing their detention center as a new criminal justice complex will receive planning funding in 2024. And then finally, there is the Queen Anne's project, which was previously funded for planning and construction. Construction is scheduled to start in fiscal 2023, and they will receive additional construction money to continue that in fiscal 2024. I'd like to go through each of these projects just briefly and what are some of the differences between what we've approved in the past and what we're seeing today. Exhibit 5 shows the Frederick County project. And the main thing I want to point out here is that there has been a reduction in the local funding available for the project. So there is a higher state share currently. And that is about $1.1 million more than we anticipated to spend last year on this project. That brings the state share up to about 50%. Most of the reason for this is because of just changes in the project schedule and the eligible costs. Moving to the Queen Anne's project, Exhibit 7 shows this change. And the last time we saw this was actually in the 2020 CIP. So there has been substantial increase and over doubling of the project cost. That also entails a doubling of the state share, or excuse me, of the state amount that would be required. And then finally, for the Montgomery County project, this has not started yet. But it is in the works, and they have been considering a replacement for the detention center for some time. One of the main issues here is the lack of sufficient medical space and specialized bed space. So this project would be not only replacing a facility that has some substantial maintenance needs, but also be improving the county's ability to meet their specialized bed space requirements. As an update to an issue we talked about last year, Exhibit 9 shows the amount expended and the amount authorized for this program every year. And in the last fiscal year, the department increased their outreach to counties, and they were able to expend more of those authorized funds that was just waiting to be reimbursed. But other than that, there's DLS has one recommended action. Well, first we would recommend to approve the general obligation bond authorization. And we also recommend to continue the local jail population report request in the Joint Chairman's report. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful analysis. See any questions? I'll now call up the administration. We can have the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. I think the Secretary of Department's here. Welcome, Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Annie Harvey, and I am the Acting Deputy Secretary for the Department of Public Safety. The department has submitted our written testimony, so I'm going to turn it over to the jails.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. The written testimony covers Mr. Cash's observations. We appreciate his thoughtful testimony. If the committee has any questions, we'd like to answer them.
See any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a couple members of the public signed up. Jason Billingsley. Okay. Let's see, Jason. Oh, great. And then also I know that Kay Beckley with Montgomery County is here, and just I know Montgomery County is in support of the Montgomery County facility. So appreciate that. And we'll now turn our attention, colleagues, to University System of Maryland. Sarah Baker.
It's not letting me do what I want to do. Not letting me do what I want to do.
Why don't, we'll give it another couple in a minute and then we can just go on with, we all have.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's you're trying to put up. Yeah, it's giving me the screen. That one? It's giving me.
So shares, stop share, try to stop share. And now do share again.
It's not doing it.
That's the one you want?
No. That's a Zoom.
What do you want? Yeah, start up the.
My file's going, that's why.
Yeah, should be it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
To go up there. Look at the green guy that.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
All right, hold on. We're just going to turn on your mic and then you can begin. There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So as you can see on the front page, there are two projects for your system office, the Caldwell Center, which was formerly the Columbus Center, and the annual USM facility renewal projects. To keep you not in suspense, the recommendations are on page 2, and those that concur with the governor's allowance and to approve 25 million ARBs for facility renewal pre-authorizations. So I want to turn to USM's facility renewal program shown on Exhibit 1 on page 3. In the 23 CIP program, $75 million less than funds compared to the 22 CIP, and this is mainly due to the exclusion of 50 million in GO bond fundings. This 23 CIP relies on USM plant funds and ARBs to fund renewal program. Additionally, the use of plant funds is deferred to 2025 with 25 million programs in each year through 28. When the use of plant funds was first programmed in the 2020 CIP, DLS raised concerns about USM's capacity to contribute $100 million over the 4-year period. When first programmed in the CIP, these funds were to be from system office stabilization accounts, and these funds are the difference between what is charged to institutions to cover their portion of the ARB debt service and the actual payment. However, system office has stated that these funds in the account are either committed to debt service or in several capital projects that were internally authorized and approved are being transferred back to the institutions. Therefore, there are no funds available to put towards facility renewal. Discussion of the Caldwell Center project, which was formerly the Columbus Center in Baltimore, starts on page 4. And just to note, the operating budget has 4.9 million in fiscal responsibility funds to support this project. This project was added to the CIP to address deferred maintenance need prevention to prevent interior damage to the building, and it will replace the 29-year-old fabric roof and refurbish the existing central plant. Since this facility is used by several USM institutions and system office, it is considered a system-wide facility and therefore part of system office's request. And while UMBC manages and maintains the building, it is not part of their inventory, and therefore this project is not part of the deferred maintenance backlog. So it's not going to affect USM's backlog, which is shown on Exhibit 2 on page 6. So USM categorizes its deferred maintenance backlog as deferred maintenance or programmatic improvements. Deferred maintenance projects total 2.6 billion, of which electrical and mechanical systems account for 68%. Programmatic improvements include renovations and remodeling that includes 2.4 billion. As November meeting, the Board of Regents adopted an updated facility renewal policy. The most significant change is a shift in focus from inputs to outcomes to better reflect the progress of an institution making progress to its backlog. Under the revised policy, institutions are required to report on the Facility Condition Index, the FCI, and this is shown on Exhibit 3 on page 7. And the index shows the percentage of deferred maintenance spending relative to the replacement costs. A lower score indicates facilities are in relatively good condition, and when tracked over time shows if conditions are improving or not. USM is attacking its backlog through various funding sources, and this is shown on Exhibit 4 on page 8. As you see, prior to 2020, facility renewals mostly funded from institutions' operating budgets and ARBs. Even though institutions have increased their spending on renewals, it accounts for a smaller share due to an increase of projects funded in the CIP that are attributed to renovations. In 23, these funds accounted for 47% of the spending. In terms of institutional spending on facility renewals, the previous policy does not fully capture all the funds and both operating and capital expended by institutions. A directive from USM clarify what expenditures can be included in its calculation of its 2% spending goal, and those are listed on page 9. And Exhibit 5 on page 10 compares the spending on facility renewals based on the previous policy and the revised policy. And when you start including the CIP projects are those funded by system, increases in expenditures range from 12% at College Park in 21 to 94% at Coppin in 22. It also results in some institutions greatly exceeding their 2% targets as shown on Exhibit 6 on page 11. And this compares the institution's performance under the old and the revised policy. And as you can see under the new policy, Frostburg and Coppin exceed 14%, while those did not have system funded or CIP projects fell below the 2%. Overall, the revised policy can lead to wide variations in the percentage of facility renewal spending on replacement value, and this diminishes the usefulness of the 2% target as an indicator of progress in reducing the backlog. A better indicator is to look at the institution's FCI over time. And it was important that USM ensures institutions are budgeting and spending on facility renewal. A greater importance should be placed on the condition of the facilities, which provide more accurate assessment on the impact on spending on the backlog. So we asked the Chancellor to comment on USM's revised policy and how institutions would be held accountable for improving the condition of their facilities. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baker, for that great analysis. Any questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much. We'll now call up the agency. And I know the Vice Chancellor's here, and I know the Chancellor is at a special building dedication for, I believe, Thurgood Marshall. So if he were here, we would be upset that he wasn't there. So, but we certainly appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you. And I am Vice Chancellor Ellen Herbston, Admin and Finance. I'm joined by my colleague, the Director of Capital Planning, Mark Beck. And indeed, the Chancellor is sorry he couldn't be with you all here today, but he is at the naming ceremony for the Thurgood Marshall Hall, which is the new home of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. And I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you, because state support was essential for that project. And we're grateful that our students, who could be our future policy leaders, will benefit from your investment. I want to thank, as always, Sarah Baker, who has done an outstanding job, and on this case really dug in with us on the change in policy. So thank you for that. Given the time and in respect to the committee's time, I'll just simply say thank you to the governor, this committee, and all your colleagues for all the continuing support across the system, and that we would appreciate and humbly ask for your support of the requested capital budget, both for the Caldwell Center, the Facilities Renewal Program, but for all of the USM. And again, given the time, we have responded in writing, so I'll just defer and let you direct me with any questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Madam Vice Chancellor. I don't see any questions. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee will now turn our attention to the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Sam Quist. Coming in now. You can start whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. This is the DLS analysis for the Maryland Higher Education Commission. On the screen, you can see that there are 2 grant programs included in this budget: the Community College Facilities Renewal Grant Program and the Community College Construction Grant Program. Starting with the larger construction program, This provides funding for facilities and infrastructure at the 15 locally governed Maryland community colleges. Exhibit 1 on page number 4 of the document is showing the annual funding levels, both previously and the planned. As you can see, approximately 80 million is typically the annual planned amount in future years. However, in prior years, the actual amount of funding has fluctuated depending on various factors such as cash flows and schedules of projects. And you can see that this is also showing items that have been added by the legislature, the yellow portion. You can see that even including supplemental items added by the legislature, the program has only exceeded the 80 million annual amount in 2 out of the previous 5 fiscal years. The 57.7 million amount budgeted in FY 24 is approximately 28.5 million less than in fiscal 2023. And the analysis is asking the Maryland Higher Education Commission to comment on if there are any factors impacting this and causing particularly FY 24, the decrease that you're seeing. So this program is providing, I said 51.7 million total to 11 projects at 8 community colleges across the state. The individual project discussion begins on page 5 and continues through page 7. For the interest of time, I won't go through each of those individually, but they are there if you have any interest in any particular project. The beginning of page 5 also lists the 3 projects that are pre-authorized for FY 25 and 26 that are included in the budget bill as well. Then the second program, the facilities renewal grant program. This discussion begins on page number 11. So this program provides funding for improvements, repairs, and various deferred maintenance projects at all 16 community colleges, including Baltimore City Community College. Under the program requirements, these are projects that may not exceed $1 million in total cost, and a college may not receive more than $500,000 in a fiscal year and may not receive funds in consecutive fiscal years. Under the mandated formula, the program is set at 5% of the funding amount for the larger construction program. And on this chart on page 11, you can see that in FY 2024, the mandated general fund portion is about 2.5 million. There's also $15 million in special funds from the state's fiscal responsibility fund. Similar to FY 2023, there was also 15 million supplemental included last year. If you look at just the mandated formula portion, however, you can see that the FY 2024 amount is approximately $765,000 lower than the fiscal 2023 appropriation. And if you consider that the planned appropriation level is about 4 million based on the 5% of the targeted 80 million for the larger construction program, the FY 24 amount is about 1.4 million less than that amount. Then exhibit number 3 on the next page. So this is showing the amounts awarded by college in both FY 23 and 24. And this is breaking out the awards in both the formula portion of the program as well as the supplemental 15 million for each year. And so you can see on this chart that just the formula portion, there are grants of $323,000 to the 8 colleges in FY 24. This is about $96,000 lower than the $419,000 allocation to the 8 colleges receiving funding in the previous year. And this is also showing that under the $15 million supplemental amount, in FY 23, all 16 colleges, including Baltimore City Community College, received funding. In FY 24, it's the intent of DBM that only the 15 locally governed receive 1 million. This is also reflective of the fact that BCCC has its own deferred maintenance program in its individual capital budget. In the analysis, DLS comments that due to the change in the mandated portion of this program funding, the committees should consider if it is the desire that the program receives 4 million annually, to set the mandated funding portion at a minimum of $4 million or 5% due to the fluctuation of program funding in recent years. Then lastly, the last item in the analysis on Exhibit 4 is just a summary of total program funding through the history of this program by college. And as far as the recommendations, DLS is recommending to concur with both the PAYGO and the general obligation bond fund portion. And that's the presentation. I can take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quist. Any questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much for that analysis. Really appreciate it. We'll now call up the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Jeff Newman. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration for the Maryland Higher Education Commission and currently representative for the commission. I'm joined today by Dan Schuster, who is our Finance Policy Analyst for Capital Budget at MHEC. I'd like to thank you for your continued funding of community college, both the construction grant and the facilities renewal grant, year in and year out. I'd also like to thank Mr. Quist for his analysis of the grants. And we have provided written responses to both the recommended actions and the issue regarding the community college construction grant program. And we'd be happy to answer any questions and turn it over to Dr. Brad Phillips from MAC.
Sure. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Phillips, I know we have a number of college presidents here as well. President of Montgomery College and I believe Hagerstown Community College. I noticed because Senator Quarterman's kind of sat up and welcome, please.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. I won't take long. I just want to thank you all for your support through the years. We've worked since 2007, creating a consolidated list for our capital construction grant program. We're very grateful for the state agencies involved in honoring that list and respecting the priorities of which we put together. And we're here today to talk a little bit about three projects from two of the colleges, but I won't take your time. I'll let them explain the request. It'll be well within our CIP limits. I just want to mention something about the facilities renewal grant funding. That was a great aspect of the analysis. Thank you for putting that in. And I just wanted to mention that one of the members of the subcommittee actually has a legislative proposal in that would solve this problem. That would be Senate Bill 918, the Community College Facility Renewal Grant Program sponsored by Senator King. That will solve the issues by allowing all of the colleges to participate. There'll be equity across each year. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Jim Clauber. I'm president of Hagerstown Community College. It's good to be with you today. I just want to talk with you a little bit about the community college construction grant program. We have a project of our advanced training center at HCC, and that building has not really been touched a whole lot since 1989 when it used to be the gymnasium. It was converted to classroom space. The roof has reached the end of its usable life. A lot of the systems in that building are obsolete and need to be upgraded. The HVAC system needs to be upgraded. We went through the process and had a Zoom meeting with the folks from DBM and also MHEC. They came out to the campus last summer and visited, told us then at that point, because prices were escalating very rapidly, you're going to need to get additional local money for that. So I went and did that. And our county commissioners have put in their first reading for their budget an additional $960,000. The Hagerstown Community College Board of Trustees has set aside some money in their capital reserve fund for local match as well. And MHEC came out, the project was on the list, but then when the list came out from DBM, the project wasn't in the list. And I'm not really sure why it didn't make it in the list, but we've answered the questions that they've had. We've submitted those answers the answers to questions they had sent to us. And I feel like, we've given them all the information that I think we can give. But we'd like to ask that this project get put back in the list. It's only $294,000. We're just starting to get rolling on the design and engineering work for this renovation project. But I will tell you, just before I turn it over to my colleague from Montgomery, this building is critically important in two respects. Number one, we've got the blueprint where, as Senator Quarterman can tell you, our Washington County Technical High School only has so many seats for advanced manufacturing training and for IT training. With the blueprint, we expect to see a significant increase in computer science, visual graphics, advanced manufacturing students coming from WCPS into HCC for workforce and credit training, and they will do so in that building. Washington County has got Hitachi Rail coming, and that's going to have over 200 advanced technology jobs, of which our technical high school only has 26 slots a year for advanced manufacturing students. So we really need to get this building renovation up and going so that we can meet the needs of the folks in Washington County. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Zucker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you to the entire committee. Senator King, always a pleasure to see you. I'm Jermaine F. Williams, president of Montgomery College. And like my colleagues, I'm here to just share a few words. You have my written testimony, and I know the hour is late, so I will not be long. Just a few words about empowering our residents, specifically empowering our residents who choose to attend their local community college, empowering them to change their lives, and doing that through ensuring that they have the facilities that they need. Right? With your support, we can do that. And today I'm looking to share about two projects that we're looking for your support on. And first is that I'm asking that you please add funds to the budget for the renovation of our Rockville library. Right? Our Rockville library, our students need an adequate library that supports their current 21st century needs and looks into the future. They need books, they need technology, they need study spaces. We have great alumni, like I want to share with you, Harrison Carvalho. Right? He is a business owner in Montgomery County. CEO, owns his own IT firm. MC graduate. He first gained access to technology in one of our libraries. This is the type of support that we need to continue to provide our residents to empower them to change their lives. The second project that is before you and ask for your consideration and support, and that is to get started on our Germantown Student Services Center. This is an equity-focused project that is going to combine so many student services into one area. Right now, our students spend so much time walking around our Germantown campus trying to find financial aid and registrar and advising. This is going to centralize those services at our Germantown campus so that students can start smart and finish strong. Students like Jefferson Vasquez Reyes, who you may recall you saw during Governor Moore's State of the State. Students like Jefferson, who desire to be a physician through his lived experience of being a patient advocate at the age of 12 for his immigrant mother and grandmother. This is the type of support that we want to continue to provide to our residents who choose their local community colleges to change their lives. The Germantown Student Services Center will also have a new library there as well. So it's meeting multiple needs. And with your continued support, we can help to empower more students like Harrison, like Jefferson, and ensure that they're able to change their lives. So again, thank you for your time and your consideration, and we really are looking for your support.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Any questions, comments? See, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Committee will now turn our attention to the Maryland Environmental Service. Carrie Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We made it to the last one. Again, Carrie Cook, Department of Legislative Services, presenting the capital analysis for the Maryland Environmental Service. So you can see on the cover chart here, this is an overview of their grant and loan program, which is called the State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund. So in the FY24 allowance, there is $11.5 million in general obligation bonds and $13.2 million in non-budgeted funds. These non-budgeted funds are the funds that Andrew mentioned at the very beginning that are coming from DNR that will be transferred to MES for the projects that are occurring on DNR properties. A little bit later, I'm going to discuss the Eastern Correctional Institution conversion project and the Conowingo Dam dredging project. And the recommended actions for this agency is to concur with the governor's fiscal 2023 deficiency for the ECI project, as well as approve the GO bonds planned for the State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund. So just a little bit about this fund. This supports capital improvements on state-owned water and wastewater plants. MES operates a little over 250 of these plants throughout the state. About 100 of those are state-owned, and the others MES operates with a contract agreement with either a local government or a private entity. And Exhibit 1 on the following pages just provides you with a list of all of these projects. I am not going to go through them all, but it shows you the amount that has been authorized previously to FY 2024, the amount in the proposed budget, as well as the future request amount. And I did also want to note here that for all these projects, except one or two, the state share is the vast majority, 98% or more. And just regarding this program generally, I wanted to note for the committee that there has historically been some trouble in terms of encumbering the funds, meaning getting those grant agreements situated for the funds that are allocated each year. There is over $4 million that has yet to be encumbered from fiscal 2020 and 2021 as of January. However, I did want to note that the agency does plan to award over $47 million prior to the conclusion of this fiscal year 2023. So that is going to bring that number down pretty substantially. And with the grant programs, like every other agency that you've seen, there are delays with the individual projects, which delays the grantee from coming back and getting those reimbursements. I also wanted to touch for just a moment on the unallocated funds. So there is a column at the bottom of that chart that shows $1 million in contingency funds, both in the transfer tax, the non-budgeted for DNR, and in the GO bonds for the statewide projects, for a total of $2 million in unallocated funds. So this is budgeted just for general cost changes, things like inflation, supply chain issues that are going to bring up the cost. And in addition to these unallocated funds, there's also the regular contingency percentages that you see with the other capital improvement projects. So for capital improvement projects generally, these percentages are usually about 5 to 10%. For MES projects, given the nature of these water and wastewater treatment projects, they've historically been 15 to 20%. But in fiscal 2024, they have increased that to 30% contingency in addition to the $2 million in unallocated funds, just based on all of the complications that can come with these types of projects. So MES should comment on the projected need for the $2 million in unallocated funds, given that the contingency percentage for FY 2024 has already been increased to 30% to account for current market and inflationary conditions. Moving on to the issues, the first one is regarding the Conowingo Dam dredging project. So as the committee recalls, in the previous budget cycle, $6 million in fiscal 2023 from the dedicated purpose account was authorized for preliminary work for design, permitting, and coordination for a dredging project at the Conowingo Dam, which is at the mouth of the Susquehanna River, and of course feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. So the idea with this project here is to dredge sediment that is trapped behind the dam, which can reduce nutrients that are flowing down the river and into the bay. There is no funding that is allocated for fiscal 2024, but the reason that I'm bringing it up is that 3.3 of that 6 million has yet to be transferred to MES, so it is still sitting in MDE's budget. MES is seeking DBM approval of their project capital program to secure the release of those funds. And then once the funds are released, they will begin these processes, the pre-engineering, design, permitting, et cetera. So DLS recommends submittal of the project capital program once to the budget committees upon DBM approval. That is not something that the budget committees have seen yet. And I also just wanted to point out here about the lack of sort of specific plans and information that was given to the budget committees prior to the appropriation of this funding. So last year, the budget committees expressed concern about this substantial investment, the $6 million, without things like a timeline, specific cost estimates, program plans, support from the Chesapeake Bay program, among other things. So you can see in the bullet points here, these are some requests that were included in last year's Joint Chairman's report. MES did submit that report in September and recommended, after review of the report, recommended against processing the 3.3 million from the dedicated purpose account to MDE. DBM went ahead and processed that. So there is the 3.3 million that's currently in MDE's budget, and then the 2.7, which is the remainder, is still in the dedicated purpose account. So I'm just going to go briefly over their response to the JCR, which they submitted in September. So one of the items was on something called the Innovative and Beneficial Reuse Pilot Project Report. So this is a report that examines sort of the costs and benefits of such a dredging project. The agency noted that the report cannot be completed without a demonstration project being completed using this dredge material from the Conowingo. The subcontractor has developed a soil blend and it meets various standards that I've listed here, but there were not immediately available projects to use that soil blend for a pilot project when they submitted the report. The report also considered dredging as a best management practice, which is a sort of verification that they use in terms of removing nutrients and other resiliency initiatives to do with the bay. So dredging is not currently considered an approved BMP by the EPA or the Chesapeake Bay program, but MDE is working with the Bay program to form an expert panel to evaluate dredging as a best management practice. And finally, the report provided an update on the cost effectiveness of dredging. So basically, the report noted that it was a preliminary evaluation. They couldn't determine decisively whether dredging is more cost effective than other approved BMPs, but they did note that current BMPs do not remove sediments that are already there, which is something that dredging could do by physically removing the sediment. So the report noted that dredging could be a potential solution utilized in conjunction with other methods. And just a very quick update on where we are currently. The agency previously reported that the IRBU report that I mentioned could not be finalized in the absence of a pilot project. However, MDE did accept the final report without the pilot project being completed, and it was posted on their website in December. The agency notes that the final report will be amended once the pilot project is completed. Some key takeaways from this report include the various uses that the sediments in Conowingo could be used for. And there is a very high cost to dredging projects generally. The report noted that those costs could be offset by potential revenue generated from selling water pollution reduction credits or various types of marketable reuse of the dredge material. The findings of the report do provide some additional context regarding the costs and benefits, but there still lacks specific plans, cost estimates, or schedules that have been yet to be submitted to the budget committees. The agency notes that cost estimates are not within the scope of work for the pilot project, but there is a lack of detailed plans for either the pilot project nor the full project. So I just wanted to make that distinction. The contractor has still yet to find an active project for the soil blend. They are hopeful that there will be a more favorable construction season this spring, and they will be able to complete that pilot project shortly. And then finally, MES is working with MDE to evaluate the nutrient reduction effectiveness of dredging and consideration of dredging as a BMP, as I mentioned earlier. This is going to be a little bit of a long process. They estimate that developing the model and the expert panel will take around 2 years to provide recommendations on dredging as a BMP. The second issue here is regarding the Eastern Correctional Institute cogeneration plant conversion. So there is a 6.2 million planned proposed deficiency in fiscal 2023 for this project. And the project seeks to convert the fuel source at ECI from wood chips to natural gas. So if you look at the chart here, which is on page 10. So this is just really showing you the different fund sources that have supported this project. So as you can see in the beginning, the funds came from the State Water and Sewer Fund. And then in fiscal 2022 and 23, a large portion came via deficiencies, which was also mentioned in the DGS analysis today. So the reason that it's budgeted within DGS is that MES as a non-budgeted agency cannot receive general funds directly. So they have been budgeted within DGS and then will be transferred to MES. I also wanted to draw your attention here to the line, which shows the estimated total project cost. You can see it initially was 4.2 million and has increased quite drastically. It about quadrupled in fiscal 2024. So the agency notes that there have been, various delays in terms of contractors, cost inflation, inflationary issues, and lots of different things. The initial estimate, they say, was not super accurate, as the construction documents and all the design was not complete. So it was an inaccurate estimate from the beginning. I also want to note here that the agency has received grants from the MEA Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program, which is that darker blue bar there. And the grant that was received in fiscal 2023 was not anticipated by DBM. So DBM may consider adjusting the amount that is in the fiscal 2023 deficiency, given that they got that additional funding from MEA. They got 3 grants in 3 different years, as you can see there. So construction design is mostly completed. Construction was originally scheduled to begin in December 2022, but was delayed until July 2023, when the agency expects the proposed deficiency funding to be available. They have coordinated some of the other aspects of the project, including delivering the equipment ahead of time so that it will all be ready once the deficiency funding is available. And they hope that the burning natural gas at the main facility will be able to start in November 2023. And for the ancillary buildings that are also on the complex, all of those will be able to be burning natural gas by February 2024. So obviously at this point, we just want to get the project to the finish line. So MES should comment on the inaccuracy of the original 4.2 million project cost estimate and how the agency is taking steps to ensure that future projects have cost estimates that are as precise and accurate as possible to promote accurate budgeting and avoid significant deficiency appropriations. That is the conclusion of my formal presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. Really appreciate it. Any questions? Okay, Director Glass, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and honored senators. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service. With me is Deputy Director Ellen Ferketic. We always thank Ms. Carrie Cook and the entire DLS team for their thorough work on the MES operating and capital budgets. Ms. Cook is top notch, and we greatly appreciate her professionalism and attention to detail throughout the budget development process. It's been a long afternoon. I have other comments, but I will take your questions and any emphasis that the committee wants to focus on.
Senator Alfred.
It's been a long day. Dr. Glass, thank you. We had this conversation last year about Conowingo. Appreciating the $6 million was a Governor Hogan priority. I'm curious if you've had conversations with Governor Moore, if he wishes to continue, appreciating you've unspent money from last year, but what is the long-term plan with dredging? Understanding that 6 million was a tiny, tiny drop in the total overall cost of what that could potentially look like.
So first, I've had no conversations with Governor Moore. He doesn't call me to talk about the programs, but I have no, I have no oh, I'm sorry. Hey, happy hour jokes. No, so we haven't received any funding, you know, so just everyone, to make sure everyone remembers that, you know, we're a billable organization. So the engineers, the scientists, all of those folks, if we were to assign them work in detail, then we would be eating overhead, which would drive up the rest of our costs to the rest of the state and other projects. So we are humbly waiting for the opportunity to brief anyone on it and wondering if it will ever be appropriated, transferred to us. So,
Mr. Chair, one more question. Do you know the total cost if we were to get all of the dredge, which is basically soft pudding from behind that?
so
What would that look like?
So, yeah, I think in our earlier, one of our earlier sessions, you asked a question about making an estimate on something, and wild guesses, you know, and I just have been told by a very important person, I do not know, but you know, it's a lot, tens of millions of dollars, but I have no accurate estimate of what it would cost to dredge the millions of cubic yards of material behind the Conowingo Dam.
Thank you. Material is a generous term for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Committee, I think that concludes today's capital budget hearings. Thank you very much and have a great night. We're adjourned.